Wrath of Angels. Chapter 1. Scene 2. The Overseer, on the edge of the ruin storm. Month 10, year 256, the 41st millennium. Weeks later, a gunship broke void near the drifting corpse. No heraldry, no vox call. It came in like a patient knife, bleeding no light. Its hull painted the color of verdict. The ship's name was absent from every roll and register, because there are names that are not written, only carried. When it docked, pressure seals clamped with the sound of teeth. An Interrogator-Chaplain stepped onto the gantry, veiled and nameless to all but Azrael. His crozius was chained across his back, not as a trophy, but as a promise. The chains themselves were etched with scripture that read differently depending on where you stood. His helm was black as judgment, visor a slit like a wound that had learned manners. Bone-white robes fell from his pauldrons like a shroud. He did not introduce himself. He did not need to. Fear did the work of ceremony. 3 Mechanicum adepts followed in a nervous constellation, robes brushing, sensors clacking, data slates jittering against augmetic fingers. They wore fear like new clothes, not broken in, chafing at the joints. Magos Ephrian led them, a gaunt vertical man whose neck pistons made a faint ticking when he lied. His left eye was a nest of lenses that ratcheted wider at every new detail, as if surprise were a function. Enginseer Threx lumbered behind, broad-shouldered and pitted, his vox band perpetually one notch too loud. He coughed Binharic prayers with the sincerity of a factory whistle. Junior Lex Mechanic Hal came last, small and brittle, hugging a reliquary box of data scrolls to his chest like a child with a favorite book. Hal's flesh eye flicked to the chaplain's crozius every few steps, the way a man glances at a cliff's edge while insisting he is not afraid of heights. Serad met them at the lock with Darnath and Kyle in tow. No honor guard, only necessity. You were expected, Serad said, which was true and not comforting. The chaplain inclined his helm a fraction, as if nodding were a concession to gravity. I am sent, he said, voice like gravel that had been taught to speak. You will provide what is necessary. He turned without waiting and paced toward the sealed corridor to the hulk. The Mechanicum scrambled after him, sensor smoke leaving a trail that smelled of hot copper and cardamom, and something like old incense burned in a damp room. At the bulkhead, Servitor Chorus 12 sang the opening cant to awaken the lock. Its voices were off by a hair. You could hear the missing tongue in one throat and the wrong memory in another. The chaplain did not look at them. He placed a gauntlet against the seal and murmured a scrap of Calibanite scripture under his breath, a line older than the Imperium and angrier. The lock clicked with a sound almost grateful. They entered the spear's hulk. The corridors were graves locked in stasis. The air was still and tasted faintly of rusted sugar. Blood had dried in ropes across walls, where gravity had failed and returned in fits. Ossuaries had spilled, femurs in neat piles like firewood, skulls that had cracked along old sutures. Companions lay where they had fallen, swords still buried in traitor flesh, the killing frozen in a tableau that refused to admit the passage of time. Litany scrolls clung to armor by the brittleness of their glue. A child's bead rosary had caught on a vambrace and hung there still, glittering like a joke. Ephrian gagged once, then made a hard little hand gesture that told his throat to behave. Hal covered his mouth and pretended it was to filter dust. Threx exhaled a string of clipped cants, blessings for stale air, for treacherous gravity, for memory that did not match the maps. The chaplain's vox rasped a litany that made the air heavier, as if the words were ballast. He moved without hurry, pausing over corpses with the care of a man reading, not looting. He leaned close to faces that had shrunken into knives and weighed what he saw there. Once, He whispered in Calibanite so softly, even the vox refused to repeat it. He could not help himself. The dead pull confession from the living. They passed a door half slagged by Melter. Threx rapped the frame with 3 knuckles, counting echoes. "Breach vector inward," he declared. "Friendly ordnance." He seemed to want someone to argue. No one did. Ephrion adjusted a lens until it clicked. "Noted," he said, which meant he wished it could be unnoted. At a cross-junction, a mural ran along the wall, half destroyed by heat. A knight of Caliban hunted a lion through black forests. The paint still glistened, though it should have flaked to dust millennia ago. The hunter's spear point was bright, the lion's mane a smear of shadow with teeth in it. The adepts crossed themselves in Binharik, fingers ticking through a tiny algorithm of hope. The chaplain stood very still. The lion's eyes in the mural were gone, eaten away by voidburn, leaving sockets that seemed to follow him. He did not like what that stirred. Memory is a trap for men who think themselves immune. He saw, as if on the underside of his lids, a hunt under Caliban's stars. Breath white, hounds low, the forest black ridges like ribs. He saw the moment when honor and truth first diverged, and how it had taken the shape of a road you could walk on for a lifetime. He breathed out, slow, and the visor fogged and cleared, and he was back in the corridor with the taste of ash on his tongue. "Proceed," he said, and the mechanicum obeyed as men obey orders that fit neatly into terror. They threaded an armory where relic blades lay shattered, some cut cleanly as if by a stroke too precise to be human. Bolters had melted into slag that cooled in lace patterns. The sigil of the winged sword had burned black onto a wall. Heat had bubbled the paint until the sword looked scabbed. A librarius fragment lay in ruin. Alcoves with cracked stasis vaults, still humming faintly, the sound like a bee trapped in a jar. Ash drifted in eddies. The smell was not only old paper, it had the edge of lightning scars and the sweetness of cooked marrow. Hal reached for a broken tome case with an impulse as foolish as love. The chaplain closed a hand around the boy's wrist. "Do not touch what remembers," he said. Hal nodded, eyes wide, and tucked his hands into his sleeves. Crypts lay deeper in, rows of sarcophagi broken along the seam, as if something had tried to open them from the inside and failed at the last tap. Names were half burned from plaques. You could read enough to know what you were missing. Someone had propped a pauldron against one casket like a flower. The reliquary beside it lay open, its contents dust, the silk lining unmarked. "Vacuum did this," Threx attempted, which developed into a question and died there. Vox shrines whispered fractured litanies on endless loop, voices overlaying until they became soup. The words slipped in and out of sense. Forgive, fallen, lion, again. The adepts flinched. Hal yanked the cable out of his own Vox set with shaking hands to make the sound stop. The chaplain pressed onward, each step a weight training the deck to bear it. They reached a short corridor where the bulkheads were dented from within. Not bullet scars, knuckles, 5 knuckles. The chaplain stood with his palm flat against one of the dents. It fit. "We brought them here alive," he said, and his voice did a thing inside the helm that might have been a swallowed curse. Ephrion's neck pistons ticked. "Data insufficient," he said, and knew he was lying. At a hatch etched with a sunburst sigil, the doors tried to stay shut. Threx chanted to them, coaxed them. The chaplain, without changing tone, recited a litany from the cloisters of the order, words iron by now, their meanings filed down to a clean edge. The doors compromised. They opened far enough for a man to pass single file, which is how confessions are delivered and executions done. The bridge lay beyond, that old cathedral of command. Consoles were dead, screens crazed. Cherub statues that once watched the captain's throne were headless, the shrapnel that took their faces still lodged in the plinths like answers. And yet the central hololith still flickered, faint, stubborn, like an exhausted heart refusing to stop. Dust swam lazily in the light and made galaxies that would never be mapped. The Mechanicum were not allowed in. The doors shuddered and slammed shut on them with an authority older than the ship itself. Ephrion squawked indignation. Threx pounded the panel. Hal said in a very small voice, "Sir," and meant father. The chaplain looked back once. "Stand," he said. It sounded like mercy. It was instruction. He was alone among the dead. He walked between consoles and sat bodies whose armor had cooled into shapes bones would never fit again. He knelt before the hololith, one gauntlet flat on the projection plate. The light stuttered and pulsed, a single thready beat. His mind became a forge. It always did here, in rooms like this, confession chambers that had been called bridges by men who preferred maps to sins. He felt the ship's gaze pressing back through the flicker, a presence that was not mind exactly, but long habit hardened into something like personality. Machine spirits are not souls. They are grooves in metal where souls have worn themselves. He despised the Mechanicum's hunger for machine above martyr, but he was not stupid. He spoke a litany under his breath not to banish spirits, but to chain his own thoughts so they did not run where he could not follow. The hololith pulsed again. He allowed himself to imagine for a heartbeat that it was agreement. He rewound what the room wanted to tell him. Brother against brother, close work, no time for speeches. The angles of fire had been intimate. Some of the kills were mercy, some were not. A console surface had smeared where a hand tried to leave a final mark and lost the argument with friction. There was the ghost of a sign there, half a wing maybe, or half something else. He did not trace it. He remembered Caliban's forests again when he did not want to. Lion hunts, cloisters, oaths spoken in the voice you save for God and for lies. He remembered the first time he questioned whether the hunt was holy or merely necessary, and how the answer had been given by a man he loved in words that said both. He remembered drawing judgment from a boy and telling himself it was mercy because the boy would not live to profit from it. He pressed his palm harder to the hololith until the edge bit and he could hold the memory down without breaking it open. He voxed on a ciphered channel that had only one other ear. "Confirmed," he said. "Brothers slew brothers. The stain runs deeper than even the records admit." Azrael's reply came cold and clean. "Record all. Speak nothing. I alone will read." The words were a door closing gently. The chaplain bowed his head. "As commanded," he said, and very softly, like a man praying not to be heard by God. "As deserved." He rose and walked to the captain's throne. It had the arrogance of empty furniture. He placed 2 fingers on the armrest, the way a priest touches a relic he does not entirely trust. The leather had dried and split into a map of deltas. A tiny fleck of bone sat in one of the cracks, white as a seed. He did not move it. He knew better than to tidy. The dead hate that. Behind the throne, a wall plaque held a list of battle honors. The words were scorched, the victories unreadable. He stared until the letters became patterns, and the patterns threatened to become meanings he could not afford. He looked away. On his way out, he paused beside a body sprawled across a Vox console. The helm had been removed carefully, the face composed. The hands were locked around a rosarius. The chain had bitten into the palm so hard the links were printed in flesh. He bent close. The man's lips were cracked, parted as if to speak. The chaplain found himself wanting, against all habit, to know the last word. He leaned in until his own helm reflected in the dead man's eye like a black sun. He did not learn the word. The dead kept it. The doors opened for him without argument this time. The adepts stood where he had left them, as if obedience were the only solid ground available. Ephraim's neck pistons were calm again. He had told himself a story he could work with. Threx had adopted a posture he thought looked like vigilance. Hal had been crying and believed no one could tell. "Proceed," the chaplain said. "No relic is to be moved. No body is to be disturbed that does not bar transit. Record. Do not interpret." He glanced at Hal, who flinched from the attention like a man from a thrown knife. "Especially you." They retraced one corridor and turned down another the ship insisted had always been there. Their lamps found a chapel tucked into the hull like a forgotten tooth. The altar was stained black where oil had burned. A stack of votive plates had fused into a column of warps and bubbles. On the wall behind, someone had carved with a knife until the blade broke. "I am Saw." The last letter was a long horizontal, dragged downward when the knife failed. The line ended in a smear of blood that had dried in waves, like tide marks. Threx lifted a mechadendrite toward it. The chaplain caught the limb mid-extension and closed his fist until servos squealed. "Record. Do not interpret." In a comms blister, they found an astropath station with the restraints still buckled, though no body sat in them. The restraints were dented outward. The headset had teeth marks. The floor beneath the chair was scored in concentric circles by boot heels. Hal started whispering numbers. Ephraim shook him once, sharply, and the numbers stopped. A side passage opened into a munitions locker. A second Astartes lay there, ivory plate cracked along the gorget, eyes filmed over like ponds in winter. A clean round hole sat dead center of the brow. The chaplain held his gaze for a full measure of time. "Mercy," he said, and Threx, who had seen 1,000 factory deaths and called none of them by name, looked at him as if he had taught a machine to weep. The chaplain did not explain. Mercy is a language men have to learn alone. They reached a blast door that had sealed on a timer that never finished counting. It had jammed an inch shy of closed. Beyond, the deck dropped away into open ribs, void glaring like a judgment too bright to look at. Through those torn bones you could see a scattering of stars and, if you stood just so, the wake glimmer of Sarad's ship like a candle in a cemetery. The chaplain stood at the threshold and lifted his chin to that cold. His vox picked up the whisper of his own breath, grainy like an old recording. The mural on the far wall, the hunting knight, was visible at an angle. From here the lion's eyeless sockets seemed almost kind. Memory is a trick knife. "Back," he said. "We have enough." The adepts obeyed with the selfish haste of men whose courage has a measured half-life. On the return step, Ephraim found his voice. "My lord," he said, crisp to hide the tremor. "We will require authority to stabilize the hololith core for extraction." "No extraction," the chaplain said. Ephraim blinked his lens nest. "The data is unique." "So is the stain," the chaplain said, and made the decision feel like the world had always been that way. Threx tried a different angle. "We can isolate the machine's spirit, cage it behind triple sanctums, thread it with wards. It will not bite." "It has already bitten," the chaplain said. "We will not keep its teeth." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Authority seeped from him like heat. Hal ventured a syllable that might have become "why," and swallowed it whole when the chaplain's helm turned a degree in his direction. They crossed the turning where the mural watched. The chaplain did not look this time. Men think they can starve memory by not feeding it their eyes. It works until it doesn't. At the lock back to Sarad's ship, The servitors sang the closing cant. The harmony was better. Something in the rhythm of the dead had taught them the note. The chaplain paused before stepping across. He looked back down the corridor into the hulk's quiet. He was not given to poetry, but the word that walked through his mind was wound. He sealed the lock and stripped his helm only once he was back under Serad's lights. His face looked carved by the same artisan who had done the cherubs, edges adamant, mercy filed thin. His eyes were a problem that had not slept in days. Serad met him in the transfer antechamber. No handshakes, no mutual pretendings. "Report," Serad said. The chaplain lifted a canteen fraction under his veil and drank like a man who knew water could be taken away as easily as breath. "You are right to fear," he said, then sealed the helm again. When he spoke into the privacy of coded vox, his words had edges built into them. "Confirmed. Brothers slew brothers. I will record. You will not speak. Azrael will read." Serad's jaw made the movement that meant he had accepted orders he wanted to refuse. "And the dead?" "They will keep," the chaplain said, which meant nothing and everything. He walked past Serad as if the corridor had been drawn to his scale. He withdrew into the stratagem's chapel and turned hunger into a tool. Fasting until lips split is a way to make judgment feel earned. He recorded every sigil and relic he had witnessed onto parchment scrolls with a hand that did not shake. Crimson wax seals were pressed with the seal of a sword cutting a circle. He wrote like a man paying a debt in exact coin. When ink ran thin, he cut it with sacramental oil. When the pen snagged, he did not swear. He sharpened it with the patience of a tailor making a shroud. Ephraim submitted requests on a timed schedule. Stabilize, map, probe, extract, each requisition tidier than the last, as if elegance could be a lever against command. Each came back denied with the same note in the margin. Record, do not interpret. Threx took to prowling the hangar, glowering at cranes that refused to squeal when he wanted them to. He threatened to exercise a loading arm with a wrench. Hal, shaken by the sight of the "I am" saw, copied the damaged inscription into his notebook a dozen times and dreamed a hand finishing it. He woke each time before the last letter and thanked the machine god for small mercies that may have been someone else's. The chaplain did sleep once, sitting upright in the pews like a corpse propped for viewing. In his sleep, he hunted a lion that was not the lion and came back to wakefulness with his mouth full of a word he would not say even in an empty room. He rose and bled a little into the oil lamp and called it sacrifice, because names are cages and cages are useful. He asked for nothing. He took nothing. When Serad visited, the chaplain lifted his helm just enough to drink water, and in that slit Serad saw that the man behind the armor was a furnace that had burned away its smoke. "You are right to fear," the chaplain murmured to him. Not comfort, just confirmation, and sealed the helm again. Out beyond them, the hulk continued to drift and remember. The mechanicum made tidy lists of things that could not be catalogued. The crew traded rumors like cigarettes in a place with no air, that the chaplain had made the mural blink, that he had spoken a word in the hololith that made every servo on the deck seize for a heartbeat, that he had judged a servitor and it had repented. None of it was true. The truth was smaller and worse. He had looked, and knowing had set hooks in him. At the edge of third watch, when the ship's bells were too tired to chime properly and only coughed, the chaplain finished the last of his scrolls. He rolled them with the tenderness men save for letters they will never send. He sealed the bundle with wax and pressed the signet until the circle closed. He did not pray over it. He did not ask for blessing. He had a job, and the job had him. He keyed the cipher channel and spoke quietly. "Archive prepared. Silence maintained." He waited for the answering click that meant acknowledgement. Azrael's voice came not with comfort, but with weight. Hold. The line died. The chaplain stood in the hush, listening to the engine's distant animal murmur, and felt the shape of what was coming press against the inside of the world, like something trying to be born the wrong way round. He extinguished the lamp, which did not make the room darker. He sat, hands on knees, and regarded the crozius chained across his back, the way a man thinks about a blade he promised not to draw. He had not brought it to bear on the dead. He would not. There are lines even zeal will not cross. But there are other uses for a hammer that believes itself a key. Outside, the hulk turned once in its sleep. The mural's empty eyes watched no one. The hololith's tired heart did not yet stop. The wound stayed open. Next, the ship would start to bleed. This has been Wrath of Angels. Chapter 1, Scene 2. The Overseer. Scene 3 follows.